straighten you out, boy. So they sent him to Columbia, where he finished his undergraduate degree and then finished his master's degree. During that time, he was continuing to act out a lot, drinking too much, carousing with women too much. There was another side of him that was very deep and very serious. He was reading some very serious Roman Catholic literature. In 1938, to try to contain his chaos, as he put it, he became a Roman Catholic in New York City. And 3 years later, still trying to contain the chaos that he was, he joined the most severe and strict religious community in the United States, the Trappists, the Cistercians of the strict observance. They didn't eat meat. They slept on straw pallets in dormitories. They didn't talk. They had a very strict life of solitude and silence in community. He entered that community on December 10th, 1941, at the age of 27. 27 years to the day later, at age 53, Merton was accidentally electrocuted in Bangkok, Thailand, where he'd gone to give an address to a meeting of Buddhist and Christian monks. 27 years in the monastery, 27 years in the world, 27 years in the monastery. In that monastery, he began as a very traditional monk, but he grew and he grew to the point where he kind of came back to the world with deeper insights. And we're going to see that progression of his insights in these 3 nights, to the point where on the last night with you, I'm going to present Thomas Merton as a contemplative social critic. How from the deep center of himself he began to see the world he had fled because it was evil and it was making him evil. He began to see it as good, but in need of redemption, in need of straightening out. And from the vision of a contemplative, he was able to see and say things the world really needs to hear. We're going to start tonight with the journey Merton calls the journey from the false to the true self. If you were here last fall when I talked, this is pretty much what I talked about. You're going to get a review of last October. Do you know the name Susan Sontag, author, died not too long ago? She said every era has to reinvent the project of spirituality for itself. Well, perhaps never in our lifetime has this been so clear as now, where people are saying, I'm spiritual but not religious. Never in our lifetime has this been so clear. And Merton, I want to suggest, is someone who can guide us in this rediscovery of what it means to be spiritual and religious. One of the novices that went to Gethsemane because of Merton and tried to be a monk there under the guidance of Merton was James Finley, who left the monastery after a few years and became a very prominent spiritual writer and psychologist. Finley said of his mentor, Merton, like all great religious figures, Merton's greatness lies in the fact that he pointed to the one thing great in all of us. His life, his words, form a kind of a mirror in which we can behold our own deepest yet often forgotten self. Merton said of his own writings, which were voluminous, it's not as an author that I would speak to you, not as a storyteller, not as a philosopher, not as a friend only. I seek to speak to you in some way as your own self. Who can tell what this may mean? I myself do not know. But if you listen, things will be said that are perhaps not written in my book. And this will be due not to me, but to the one who lives and speaks in us both, our true self, the God of whom we are the image and likeness. For Merton's, this spirituality was, like Mary Oliver said, a journey. To become holy, to become a saint, means first of all becoming as full a human being as possible. And I think in that sentence lies the great appeal of Merton. Cross religious lines, interreligiously, because who wouldn't want to become as fully human being as possible? He says, for me to become a saint means to become myself, not somebody else. Therefore, the problem of sanctity and salvation is, in fact, the problem of finding out who I am, discovering my true self. Trees and animals have no problem. God makes them what they are without consulting them, and they're all perfectly satisfied. But with us, it is different. God leaves us free to be whatever we like. We can be ourselves or not, as we please. We are at liberty to be real or to be unreal. We may wear now one mask and now another, and never, if we so desire, appear with our own true face. Why? And you'll find that Merton is full of buts because his message is such a paradox. He can't say something without saying, but. But we cannot make these choices with impunity, for causes have effects. And if we lie to ourselves and to others, we cannot expect to find truth and reality whenever we happen to want them. If we have chosen the way of falsity, and we all have, from our birth we were born into an imperfect situation before we ever had a chance to choose our own mess-ups. And then along the way, perhaps based upon some of the mess-ups we got when we were in our own homes, we continued the mess-up. I tend to think of ourselves as sometimes like a sponge. A sponge that's plunged in a bucket of dirty water. My mom and dad, the town I grew up in, my mother's relationship with her mother-in-law, my mother smoked. All those things were there that I was born into. Sometimes Christian theology calls it original sin. From our origins, we're a little screwed up before we ever had a chance to choose our own screw-ups. If we've chosen the way of falsity, and I would add, face it, we all have, we must not be surprised that truth eludes us when we finally come to need it. And here's Merton's clincher line in this paragraph. We are called to share with God in creating our true identity. We are called to share with God in creating our true identity. Paradox. How do you create what you already are? By getting stuff out of the way that's not who you really are. That's what Merton will call your false self. So to become a holy person, to become a spiritual person, to become yourself, is a question of appreciating where one is in the journey of life, on the road below us. But then learn when you were ordained a priest, you had a sense that you were different. You dressed differently, you lived differently, you behaved differently. And it was very easy to over-identify with the role of Father Collins, and in the process lose Patrick. Because priest is something someone does, it's not who he is. But you can so overplay the role that you begin to think, that's who I am. No. That's a false self if you over-identify. Women do this when they're mothers, I think. It takes so much, you who are mothers know, to birth and nurture a human being toward adulthood. To the point where it becomes who you are. It becomes your identity. Sometimes your husband even calls you mother instead of my wife. But if you so oversubscribe to the role of mothering, you're going to end up smothering your children. You've got to get over it and become a co-adult with your children, because mothering is something a woman does for a relatively brief period of her life. It's not who she is. Her husband can fall into a similar trap, thinking of himself as the worker, bringing home the bacon. My identity is I'm president of the company. My identity is I'm the plumber in town. My identity is what I do. No, it's not. And that really shows up when the guy retires or the job goes to Mexico. We had a priest in our diocese who'd been pastor of a little country parish for 30 years. When he retired, that first year, he tried to take his life twice because he didn't know who he was, apart from being pastor of St. Paul's. Fortunately, the man got the help he needed, and last year he died a very integrated and happy person. But you oversubscribe to a piece of yourself as if that is yourself. Americans can do it. We are number one, the last superpower. That's so. Men and women can do it. Male, female. When most of us grew up, there was a pretty clear definition of what it meant to be a woman and to be a man. You know, the guys think and the women cry, to over-exaggerate. Well, if you can't both think and cry, you're not much of a human being. But, you know, men are supposed to tough it out, and women can have feelings. Well, false self, not true. Now, all of those are kind of like that sponge in the bucket of water. It just sucks up what's given us by our culture, our family, our job, our town, our church. On the journey of life, you got to squeeze the sponge. Squeeze that stuff out so the water becomes pure water. I'm going to give you one example of a freely chosen false self. Most of it isn't like that at all, but this is. The man I had known for many years came to me when he was 65 years old, and he said, I have to tell somebody this. My whole life has been a lie. I knew the man well, very prominent professional, with a wife and 2 beautiful daughters. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I've known since I was very small that I'm gay. And I knew that to live in this town, in my profession, I had to get married to fix it. Of course, it didn't fix it. My whole life has been a lie. Well, I tried to help him see his whole life hadn't been a lie, but that part was a clearly, consciously chosen deception, understandably so in that time and that place. Most false self, you don't sit down and decide to be a liar. You discover along the way, that's not the truth. That's the deception that I've been duped into. Well, every one of us is shadowed by this illusory false self. The secret of my identity, says Merton, is hidden in the love and mercy of God. I cannot hope to find myself anywhere except in God. Therefore, there's only one problem on which all of my existence, my peace, and my happiness depends: to discover myself in discovering God. And if I have found God, I will have found my true self. For my true self is God. And the only one who can teach me to find God is God alone. Thomas Merton, I'm told by those he taught at Gethsemane, quoted often two lines from St. Paul's writings. I live, now not I, but Christ lives in me. Who's the I that no longer lives? The false self. Who is the true self? In Christ. You have died, Paul wrote, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Who's the you who died? Your false self. The true self, hidden with Christ in God. Our true self is then our whole self. It's not like on that journey in the road below us, there are two selves walking down two sides of the road, the true self here and the false self here. No. True self is our whole self before God. It's the self the Father is creating us to become. A self being found in Christ. It is for this awareness that our souls in stillness wait. Now you get to sing. Soul in stillness waits to be made whole, to become our deepest, truest, best self. Merton says the difficult ascent, the climbing from our falsity toward our truth, is accomplished not through pleasant advances in wisdom and in insight. In other words, it's not an intellectual trip. You don't read the right book, go to the right guru, do the right thing, and then you get it. It's not what you're doing. It's what you're allowing God to do in you. This difficult ascent involves what Merton calls the painful unlayering of levels of our falsehood. Untruths deeply embedded in our consciousness. Lies which cling more tightly than a second skin. When I read those lines, I think of the deep spirituality of the 12-step program, programs that help people out of addictions, facing untruths deeply embedded in their consciousness, lies clinging more tightly than a second skin. That's true for all of us. Those who sink low and go to those healing programs know perhaps better than any of us what's going on in life. The false self is a human construct built by our selfishness and flights from reality. Think of all those examples I gave: male, female, men, women, priest, mother, worker, flights from reality. Because this is only a part of us and not the whole truth of us, it's not of God. And because it's not of God, our false self is substantially empty, incapable of experiencing the love and freedom that God wants us to know and to realize. It's what prevents us from coming into that more abundant life that Jesus came to promise us. And by the way, that's my favorite scriptural line from John's Gospel. I have come so that you may have life more abundantly. That's what we're talking about these 3 nights, a life more abundantly. Burton frequently contrasts an individual with a person. The false self is the individual, separated self. This superficial I isn't our real self. The individual understands himself as I'm me, not you, and the connection often never happens. Very much present in the Western consciousness since the Enlightenment on. Individualism, rugged individualism made this country. Well, it made us for the good and the bad. Because we're not individuals, we are what Merton calls persons. And persons discover their identity in communion with other persons, not as isolated, separated, me first, me last, me only. You know, often in our country we talk about rights, and not often about correlated responsibilities. Individuals are into rights. Persons are into rights with responsibility. Big difference. This superficial empirical self, the individual self, is not truly the hidden and mysterious person in whom we subsist before the eyes of God. What happens to the false self? What do we do about it on the road below us? Burton says the false self is annihilated in us, not by being eliminated. Remember Jesus talking about the weeds and the wheat grow together till the harvest? You don't get rid of it. It's too much a part of who you are from that sponge on. What happens is it becomes annihilated by, first of all, being acknowledged as truly a part of who we are. Not to be ashamed or guilty, but to be real. Acknowledged as truly a part of who we are and accepted as part of who we are. It's called humility of the earth. Humus, the Latin word humus, is the root of humility. We get who we are from the earth. Gradually over a lifetime, the power of the false self over us is diminished. It doesn't run our show. Why? Because it becomes integrated into our conscious selves as truly a part of who we are. We see it for what it is. We know when it shows up. We know when it tries to run our show. And we say, no, that's not who we are. We're not going to act like that. We see it differently. Remember, transformed vision. We see ourselves differently in the light of a different story. In this way, over a lifetime, the true self is gradually emerging from the inside out. And we are healed of the fracture between the false self and the true self by discovering the presence of God as our true self within our own consciousness. Contemplative spirituality is about transforming consciousness, thinking, seeing who we are, discovering the presence of God within our own consciousness. Thomas Merton entered Gethsemane Abbey in 1941 to face his own false self and to try to let the true self gradually emerge. By 1965, he was feeling a call to live more and more in solitude, and the abbot allowed him in 1965 to move into a hermitage about a mile from the monastery, coming in to join the community for Mass and lunch every day, but having much more time to himself, to write and pray. Now you would think that after living in the monastery from 1941 to 1965, he would have faced the demons pretty well, got the act together. Well, you know, when you spend more time alone and quiet, there are always pieces that keep surfacing that you haven't dealt with yet. And for Merton, that was sexuality. Merton had never really loved or been loved by another human being. His mother was kind of a cold fish. When she died and he was 6 years old, she wouldn't allow him to come to the hospital to see her. She wrote him a letter telling him goodbye. He abused that woman at Cambridge. He abused women at Columbia. He'd never really been a man with a woman feeling love. Well, in March of 1966, he had an operation on his back in the hospital in Louisville. There was a nurse there. He was about 23. He was 50. And they fell passionately in love. He knew it was wrong, and yet it brought out parts of him, sides of him that he had never experienced before. Between March and October, he dealt with it, and they both put it behind them. But he was never the same, because a piece of him had been brought forward into his consciousness, and it was being healed. It was being integrated, not eliminated, integrated into his deeper, truer self. Here's what Merton wrote from that hermitage in the woods. Shall I drive evil out of my soul by wrestling with my own darkness? No. This is not what God has planned for me. It is sufficient for me to turn away from my darkness toward God's light. I don't have to run away from myself. It's sufficient that I find myself, not as I have made myself by my own stupidity, but as God has made me in wisdom and is remaking me in infinite mercy. Then I will truly know God, since I will wake up and realize I am in God, and God is truly in me. For that realization to happen for Thomas Merton, and you, for me, there's no way around what Andrew Lloyd Webber describes as the music of the night. chance with you. It includes the music and the texts. Well, when I was preparing it, it also has pictures of Merton, Gethsemane Abbey, his hermitage. It's a very interesting visual as well as verbal and musical thing. But somebody said to me, how did you ever get permission to use Andrew Lloyd Webber's music? And I said, permission? It never occurred to me. So I wrote a letter to an office who sent it back saying, wrong office, write to this one, wrong office. Third time I got a denial. Some office in Los Angeles. So I called and I said, why was I denied? And they said, well, the decision was made in Webber's office in London, and they never explained why. I said, is there any appeal? No. He said, well, what's the number in London? Won't do you any good. I'll pay for the call. What's the number? So I got a lovely Brit on the phone. He said, oh yes, Paul. I so remember your request, but we couldn't possibly imagine music of the night being used for anything spiritual. On the stage, probably not. In this context, there's probably not a more spiritual song that I will sing to you at these 3 nights than music of the night. As we face the music of our own night and bring it into God's light, the realization of our true identity is happening. And we're becoming transformed from within by God's own inner presence, so that we become more like God, living in God, seeing as God sees, loving as God loves, all creation, with compassion. And then Burton says, oh, by the way, it's God doing it in us, not we. Merton tends to speak of ourself as a kind of a non-self, a transcendent self, metaphysically distinct from the self of God. Distinct, but not separate, remember? Metaphysically, ontologically distinct from the self of God, and yet perfectly identified with that divine self by love and freedom. So that gradually on that road below us, there begins to appear more and more just one self. The very center of ourselves becomes who we are. He says, in that very center, we are encountering God, often hidden in our deepest wounds. God hidden in our deepest wounds, our most vulnerable place, where God alone can turn the night into light. This is what constitutes our inner movement from being made in the image of likeness, image of God, but living into the likeness of God. Some theologians describe the Adam and Eve story in the Garden of Eden when they got thrown out. They didn't lose the image of God. If they had, they wouldn't have been there anymore. The image of God is our being. But they lost the likeness to God because they decided they wanted to be God. That's what the story tells us. And it's a story that we often get trapped in ourselves. This journey is moving from the image of God, living into our likeness to God. I want to tell 2 stories that I think help to make this clearer. A young man went to a spiritual woman, probably like G. And the young man said, Reverend G, how can I become enlightened? How can I wake up to this stuff we're talking about here tonight? And G says, well, there's nothing you can do to become enlightened, any more than there's something you can do to make the sun rise. The young man says, well, Reverend G, why do you have me go to church? Why do I go to Wednesday night meditations? Why do I pray? Oh, Reverend G says, all those spiritual exercises, they are there so that you will be awake when the sun rises. It's a matter of being awake to what is, not trying to do something that isn't. Well, the young man went away and he came back to G later and he said, I like this concept very much, but how can I make real for myself? How can I realize this communion with God that we're talking about, this enlightenment? G said, well, you might imagine the distance isn't there. The distance between God and me isn't there. Does that mean God and I are one? No, says G, not one, but not two. He says that's impossible. Mathematically, logically impossible. It can't be. It has to be one or two. No, G says. It's like the sun and its rays. Not one, but not two. It's like the ocean and its waves. Not one, but not two. It's like the singer and the song. Not one, but not two. What we're talking about is realizing our not one, but not two-ness. God and the human person are distinct, but not separate. That's unity of consciousness. That's what we're aiming at in these nights together. What do you think Thomas Merton would say constitutes a perfect person? I think you're going to like this. It's one of the reasons I like this guy. He says, the perfect person is not the one who has it all together. What a relief. Not the one who has it all together. No, he says, perfection is never a possession of any person. It's not a matter of achieving some impossible, inhuman, saint-like condition, but rather of being gradually fulfilled on life's journey as the unique person each of us is created to become. So perfection, rather than a possession, is an ongoing pursuit, ever moving forward deeper into the mystery of God. And each fulfillment on the journey, each time you say, oh, now I see, oh, my eyes are open, oh. Each fulfillment on the journey contains in itself the impulse to further exploration. Or as the great American theologian Yogi Berra put it, it ain't over till it's over. It's kind of a gradual realizing what is the center of my life.
Always
nearing the end. It's session 1. Becoming whole is what we're talking about. False self becoming integrated into the truth. Becoming whole. This means, Merton says, that we begin to realize there's a deep underlying connection of opposites. A deep underlying connection of opposites. The divine, the human, seemingly opposite. Go deep enough, and there is the connection. The deep underlying connection of opposites when it comes to gender. Masculine energy needs to be complemented with feminine energy in every person, male and female. The deep underlying connection of what is only apparently opposite. And the healing of our world, the bringing of the kingdom of God, is a matter of people realizing the deep underlying connection of what appears to be opposite. Look at the Middle East, the Arab Spring turning into a 25-year Arab winter. It doesn't seem like it's ever going to come together. They don't see the underlying connection of what is so painfully opposite. We could go on and on with examples in the real world of what apparently is opposite, but if you get down deep enough, you realize the connection. One of Merton's most frequently cited lines is this: we must contain within ourselves all divided worlds. We must contain within ourselves all divided worlds. We can't heal the world out here until we are healed in here, and then we have something to offer, both as a model and an energy. I think once again the gender energy differences between the masculine and the feminine in males and females. Containing all divided worlds within ourselves. One of the reasons that Merton spent a lot of time studying Protestant theology, Protestant traditions, and then moved into interreligious dialogue with Buddhists and Hindus and Taoists, he felt if he could bring those things together and unite them within himself and see the deep underlying connection of those traditions, he would be contributing to the healing of the world around him. We must contain within ourselves all divided worlds. To do that, we need to listen to that deep center of ourself. And this last song that I invite you to sing is about that. Maybe you're going to have to, somebody's going to have to pull this up a little bit. Thank you. And as we get to the bottom of the page, just lift it a little. It's called Hosea, the prophet from the Hebrew Scriptures. As you sing this song, think of this as your deepest, truest self, your divine core singing to you. Come back to me. Come back to me with all your heart. Don't let fear keep us apart. Come back to all Journey from the false to the true self, Merton says, is in many ways a kind of a recovery of the simplicity of our childhood. A simplicity that gets lost in the confusing complexities which adulthood necessarily brings to us. That simplicity, that childlikeness, can be recovered, not by becoming naive and inexperienced like a little child, but rather by choosing to live and be more simple. The adult can both embrace the complexities of one's life, including the realization of false self, and move beyond those complexities by choosing to be simple, to be free. It is a gift to be simple. It is a gift to be free. It is a gift to come down where we ought to be. Tis the gift to be simple, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to vow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning, we come round right. Sing it with me. 'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. So true. So true. Merton was a poet. I find his poetry very abstruse and very difficult. But when he writes prose poetically, like what I'm going to close with tonight, it's incomparable. This is taken from the book that I would recommend to you if you want to dig into Merton yourself. It's called New Seeds of Contemplation, 1962. Our souls are like wax, waiting for a seal. Remember years ago, important people would send documents around and they would put a piece of wax on it and they would have their own unique identity and seal to impress in that wax. Merton says our souls are like that wax, waiting for the impress of the seal. By themselves, they have no special identity. Their destiny is to be softened and prepared in this life by God's will to receive, at their death, the seal of their own unique degree of God, of likeness to God in Christ. This is what it means, among other things, to be judged by Christ. Did you become yourself or somebody else? The wax that is melted in God's will, the wax that is melted in God's will, can easily receive the stamp of its identity, the truth of what it was meant to be. But the wax that is hard and dry and brittle and without love will not take the seal. For the hard seal descending upon the hardened wax grinds it to powder. Therefore, if you spend your life trying to escape from the heat of the fire that is meant to soften and prepare you to become your true self, and if you try to keep your substance from melting in that fire as if your true identity were to be hard wax, well then the seal will fall upon you at last and crush you. You will not be able to take your own true name and countenance, and you will be destroyed. Destroyed by the event that was meant to be your fulfillment. Our souls are like wax, waiting for the seal to be impressed in the life that has been softened by the fires of our relating to one another, the fires of our questioning who we are and where we're going on the road to loss. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Next week, we're going to look at what I think is the second theme of Burton's spirituality and the third theme. Burton will say, if you want to make this journey from your false toward your true self, you need to become more of a contemplative person. So he's going to tell us what he means by contemplative person. Then he says, you'll never become a more contemplative person unless you deepen your prayer. So next week he's going to tell us about being a contemplative and being a person of prayer. Two sides of the same coin. Last night, we're going to look at what Merton calls the essential condition for making this journey. The essential condition for being a contemplative person of prayer, and that is to choose a measure of solitude and silence for your life. I don't know how young people today are ever going to become contemplative, plugged into this noise all the time, never ever listening, being entertained to death. I once asked a novice of Merton's when he was the spiritual director at Gethsemane, and I was first visiting there back in the early 90s. I said, Father Matthew, how do you become more contemplative? He smiled like most contemplatives do when non-contemplatives ask stupid questions. And he said, well, you might start by cutting down on the input. I was working out at the Hope College gym today, watching. Ears, thumbs going. Never listen. Always input, input, input. That's going to be devastating to the sense of yourself. Constantly being interrupted by texting, by noise, never being focused, never being centered. I don't know how in the world they're ever going to do it. They won't only not be religious, they won't even be spiritual. Because unless you learn to shut up and listen, you'll never hear that still voice of God. So that's what we're going to do. And then the final piece, after talking about the desert of solitude and silence, we're going to look back from that deep interior place at the world in which we live, with the eyes of Merton as a contemplative social critic, seeing what he saw coming in the 1960s before he died in 1968. And I think you'll find how prescient he was, how he could see where we were headed. And we're still there in a bit of a mess. But a mess that can be overcome if you begin to transform your vision, your values, and then your behavior. So thank you again so much for being here tonight. If you want to get the DVD, I'll have it back there every night. It's $20, and you might find it of interest to keep focusing on what we're talking about here. G, you've got the final word.
Father Patrick, thank you ever so much. It was inspiring, at least as much, if not more than what we expected. Thank you so very much. I am personally inspired and looking forward to your next two presentations.
Me too.
I thank you all very much for coming. I am sure that you're convinced that it was well worth your time. And we're looking forward to having you back and spread the word, tell your friends. You know that they will enjoy it, even though they missed the first presentation. However, it is available. We have live streamed it. It is available on our website. If you
Well,
go
that's
there.
right. You have a website
Yes,
that
so-
shows this to people.
So they can listen to it, watch it, and then come next time and enjoy the next
Did you
presentation.